Linode Fun Podcast Network.
This podcast is brought to you by our friends at Linode. Whether you're working on a personal project or managing your enterprise's infrastructure, Linode has the pricing, support, and scale you need to take your project to the next level. Get started on Linode today by going to linode.com/remote Ruby.
This is Remote Ruby.
Have you any remote idea to the meaning of the word?
New home.
Yeah, what's up?
Home sweet home.
Just living the dream. Nothing real new and exciting. Shannon and the kids are up in Nashville, so I've had this very quiet house other than my dog barking, and I'm like, what am I going to work on this weekend? Because I have all this time and all this peace. So
yeah, that sounds like fun. When was that last time that we did one of those weekends where we just like hung out on Slack and stuff, like a Zoom call and just all worked together? That was fun.
Yeah, I was talking to Andrew from Air about maybe doing that this weekend. So if you're doing any late night coding,
yeah, I definitely
same goes to you, Mr. Mason.
Maybe Saturday. My birthday is on Sunday, and I'm planning to not do anything, and I'm not working on Monday either. So
how old are you turning?
Saturday down. How old?
Yeah,
24.
So young.
Jason, your beard always makes you appear like you're 6 years older than me or something. And it always is strange to find out like we're like almost the exact same age.
I missed a real opportunity growing up. I grew up very religious and was like, oh no, like I cannot touch alcohol, especially not before I'm 21. But like I had a real golden opportunity because I always looked older than I was. Yeah,
you could have been that kid selling fake IDs. Now you can build a Rails service that will sell fake IDs for you.
Andrew, that means that you are younger than Ruby.
I am younger than Ruby.
Matz tweeted, and I guess it was in Ruby Weekly too, that Ruby's 27 now. Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow.
That's pretty crazy.
That means you can also rent a hotel or a car.
Yeah, right. How old is Rails, I wonder?
2003 or 4 when he started on it.
Yeah.
I think 3.
It's pretty old then.
I can't do math or I tell you what that is.
That's weird, yeah.
The Wikipedia says the initial release date was 2004. So, yeah, probably 2003 or earlier when he was originally working on it. That's what, 16, 17 years?
Crazy.
Yeah.
That means when I got into it, it was just about to turn 10 years old.
Wow. It's pretty crazy. Yeah, I think I got into Rails around 2010. So yeah, same time roughly or whatever. I originally looked into Python or Ruby because I was looking for a language that would work cross-platform back in 2007, something like that. I think when I was first trying to figure out, what to build, what to teach myself, and I ended up going with Python originally instead of Ruby because Python just was installed by default on Ubuntu, and Ruby was not. So that was guess I'll use that instead. And as far as my understanding was at the time, they're the same language, just a little different. The syntax and all that looks the same or close enough. But as it turns out, they're vastly more different underneath. It's Ruby's significantly way more flexible, but it's the philosophy of Matz and everything that he brings to Ruby that really makes it special. It should be fun, but also extremely flexible. That's some of the coolest stuff that makes Ruby so special. So it's pretty awesome to see that's 27 years old. That's really, thriving still because it's what we should be doing. We're programmers. We should be building programs for humans at this point more than we should be for the computer to understand it and execute it fast.
Not only that, but Matz is still involved after 27 years.
Yeah, that's so cool. I know he's talked a little bit about moving on or whatever and getting replacements and that sort of thing in place so that someone else can lead the charge here in the next few years or whatever when he decides to retire. But Man, it's crazy. Like Go Rails is probably the longest thing I've ever worked on, which is like 6.5 or 7 years, something like that. But never worked on anything for 27 years straight. That's pretty awesome. Like huge respect.
I haven't even worked on one thing for more than 2 years at this point.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. Like for the longest time, I like just being in high school or college was like my longest thing I'd ever done. You know, there's definitely dividends that pay off the longer you can stick with something. But yeah, it's interesting. Like when you're learning, you jump around between projects and jobs and all that so often. But 27 years of Ruby is pretty fantastic.
Yeah. And I can only imagine because people sometimes can't be the best to work with. So like,
yeah,
maintaining a project that bukus of people use, like that takes a lot of emotional toll. Like I guess any open source does, but so
yeah. Otherwise, you end up with a grumpy old Linus Torvalds mentality or something.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And Matz is always so like he's still so excited to talk to people and so nice. It's just mind-boggling.
When I was at RubyConf this year, I'd never seen Matz in person. And the one thing I immediately thought was like, he looks so happy. He looks like just a genuinely happy person.
Every time I've tried to take a picture with him, it always ends up blurry, and I never have like. I'm always like, well, I used my one chance. Like I can't ask again.
It's just blurry with happiness.
Yeah. Anything cool going on? I know all three of us bought Tailwind UI.
Yeah, I have had zero time to. I think I installed it, but didn't actually try any components. There's a few people trying to use it in Jumpstart Pro, so I just like debugged why it wasn't working. And one of those things was the version. We were just one version behind 1.1 instead of 1.2, and that was like causing a little bit of. It was like the Tailwind UI / plugin or whatever require that you had to do just wouldn't require, and updating that seemed to do the trick. But have you guys installed it and fiddled with it at all yet?
I've been fiddling.
How's it been?
I like it a lot. Yeah. I had somebody message me and they're like, this wasn't what I thought it was. I thought it was going to be like a replacement to Bootstrap. And I was like, oh, no, this is exactly how I thought it was going to be based on just hearing Adam talk about it and like watching them tweet about it. And I was like, you could make it a Bootstrap replacement. I was like, but they made it so configurable for you that it's not going to have a lot of the problems that Bootstrap does have. And he was like, well, I want to be able to like easily reuse stuff. And I was like, okay, well then pull all the classes off, give it a custom name, and then go in your CSS and do add apply.
Yeah, exactly.
That's kind of one of the things like Adam talks about making Tailwind like scalable is like do all these things and then put it into some kind of component. I think I saw him tweet or talk about that like he didn't even really necessarily want to add apply into Tailwind, but yeah, like I know Adam's really big on if you need to reuse this component.
He's tweeted about not even liking to make components. I don't remember. It's like a month ago or something, but I know he tweeted like something about like, I don't even know if you need to bother with, making components. I can understand it for something like buttons or whatever, but like, for navbar classes, the second you want to do something unique, like put an avatar in there or like a drop down or a button or, it tends to be like eventually you're going to do something that's not standard. So you have to build unique cases kind of for everything. So it's like, is it really that much harder to just copy paste from the other nav links and make a new one and go build your extracted version? And then, you can't apply that in the avatar case because it's slightly different because it's an image now or whatever. And I was like, I kind of get it. Like not all cases, like buttons are very systematic or whatever, but like a lot of these things end up being kind of custom. And if you have all the classes there, you can tweak individually, then you can make it look perfect. by not having used the extracted versions. Because if you extract them, then you got to build a unique case for that one, or like try and undo some of those things in it, which is like the whole reason that Bootstrap was a pain in the butt. Was it was really hard to undo stuff, and there was just not a great way to like, you know, grab the source code and customize it.
Yeah. I guess in my mind, like I only think of a component as something I will like use again. So like a navbar for me, I'm like it. I know there's maybe cases, but for me, when I put a navbar, it's like a SaaS app. Like that's the only time.
Yeah, and I always want to grab somebody's example navbar and then tweak it, and then it's always different than what they had. But I want to make sure that it like, you know, compresses into something nice on mobile with a, you know, hamburger menu or something, you know. And so like having that in Tailwind UI or like the components examples in Tailwind CSS is about all I really want. You know, I don't need the like nav links and those other navbar things that Bootstrap gives you, because I always have to undo them or customize it pretty heavily. But I agree with you. Like there's some of those you just want a good starting place. And like Tailwind UI is pretty much exactly that, which is like, we know you're going to customize it. So here's some pretty looking stuff from the very beginning that's like detailed to the extreme too, which he was talking about in that tweet the other day about, what was it, the focus like class or something, where the credit card form example or something he had was, you know, not working just perfectly. And so he was spending a while like fixing that up. So it was like, you know, perfect details around that. That's the kind of stuff that like is great to have someone else do rather than you having to fiddle with it yourself.
Yeah, someone was asking me, maybe one of my coworkers, if I liked working on front-end code. And my answer is, I love working on front-end code where there's like a pre-existing design system in place, which is where we're at work right now. Like we have a product designer and he's amazing at what he does. And he's worked with one of the other developers to like actually customize Bootstrap to be like how the app should function, like how it should look. And so like when I go to use a card, like I know it's how the designs are going to like, and it's been such a productivity boost. And like we've paired that with like Action View component. It's like we have a card component and like I can just reach for that card component and give it a block and pass my stuff in. And yeah, so Tailwind UI for like my side stuff I'm so excited to work with that.
Yeah. I made a comment to Nate the other day because I was like bike shedding stuff on the front end. And I was just like, dude, if we had a designer, I guarantee you we would be 200 to 300% faster, at least, at minimum.
Yeah. I agree. Like
we had a designer before who was also amazing, but he had to split his time between like the marketing side and the product. We didn't have an actual, like, I guess, guide or like system in place, especially one that was like paired with Bootstrap. And we were on Bootstrap 3, so like our hands were even more tied. And so like we went up to Bootstrap 4. We started setting some like hard lines in the sand. It's been really good for us. So
yeah, I worked with a designer at my last job, and he now works for Square, and I believe he's hiring Rails devs too, maybe. But oh my God, like we were able to, he'd give me a design. I would like immediately turn around with like, hey, what about this? Like, what if the text is too long and it wraps? You know, stuff you don't think about in the first version of your design or whatever. And we'd be able to jump back and forth like so fast and produce stuff that was like way better than I could do on my own. And we were able to like tease all those little edge cases out really quickly that he couldn't see from, you know, Photoshop or Sketch or whatever. And oh man, it was some of the best, most productive time that I ever had working with someone. I really, really miss that. And yeah, I think those like, I know Basecamp talks about this too. They have like little teams of a designer and one or two developers. And I think that's like extremely fast to build stuff that way with those tiny teams. Because that, when you're designing a drop down or, you have to have some select out of multiple options, they can give you like the idea of which one to use. You can go build it and iterate back and forth on that, where if you just left it to whatever you were going to do as the developer, it would look ugly or whatever and not be as intuitive. So yeah, I think that's really fun to do that.
Yeah. Even like yesterday or today, we hadn't brought like tricks over into our BS4 stuff yet. It's still in. So like as part of this transition, we actually run both Bootstrap 3 and Bootstrap 4 in our app. Bootstrap 4 runs through Webpacker and Bootstrap 3 is through the asset pipeline. And so we hadn't brought tricks over. And so while we were there, he was like sending me icons to replace tricks icons. And like, we were like customizing every little detail about tricks. And like, it was just so cool. It's stuff I would never in a million years know how to do.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. It's funny because sometimes those can go out of hand too, where you're like, we need to move this stuff over. What was it? Recently, I moved Go Rails from Rails 5.2 up to Rails 6, which was like, I don't know why I never finished it. And now it's up there, but it was like moving stuff from the asset pipeline over to Webpacker was such a pain in the butt because there was those little things of like, well, if I'm going to do this, I should make sure I'm using Rails UJS instead of jQuery UJS. And oh yeah, the parameters for like the method or type of request are different names now because jQuery's Ajax method was like type or something, and then method for the other one. I forget which one's which now even. And those nuances like ruined a few things where some stuff I forgot to update or, like test, but it was some like obscure little feature that you didn't think of. Yeah. I eventually want to upgrade to action text too, but stuck with all the content and markdown on our comment system right now. And there's no real good markdown WYSIWYG editors for comments that I can find. Like I've looked a whole ton and there's not been much new WYSIWYG thing. So I've kind of been thinking about moving to action text and tricks for comments. But, that's another thing I could choose to do or just delay.
Yeah, definitely delay.
Yeah. You get like caught up in a lot of those like rabbit holes pretty easily if you let yourself.
Yeah. This has been kind of a week of rabbit holes. You talking about jQuery just started triggering me. All the front end stuff. I did a lot of front end stuff this week and I'm just so tired of it. I'm just so tired of working in the front end. Like I used to really like it. And now that I don't have a designer, I hate it. I hate it so much. It's such a time suck.
Yeah. Front end without a designer is like a really hard thing to do. I'm designing the last bits of a form for a Hatchbox to create managed databases on RDS and Elasticache and DigitalOcean and stuff. But there's like, these unique options for each one of those that my form in Vue has to be, okay, you choose these things and then we display options in this case, but not these other cases. And we'd only want to display those when you've set some of the previous options. And it's just a nightmare. And I've got to go sync stuff back and forth from the server and it's not fun. So I'm like, and then that was one of the projects that's still on jQuery for Ajax requests and stuff. And I'm like, oh my God, like all this stuff needs to get updated. And ideally I would be using something more like Stimulus Reflex or something for the form, but because everything else is already in Vue there, I'm just going to keep it consistent. And then I don't want to have two different systems for my complex forms until I decide I'm going to port them all over to something, hopefully better. It's felt like a rabbit hole of maintenance and other stuff because it's like the only project I use Vue on right now. And I don't touch it very often. So when I have to come back to it, it feels like a nightmare to like, how does this work again? What are the callbacks? Like, what is the context of this and all these different methods and whatever. It's not super fun.
I've been doing quite a bit of front end work this week. And yeah, I mean, not to like harp on it, but it really does make a difference having someone help you guide those decisions. And it makes it fun. This is the first job where I worked at an ad agency, but like this is the first like product job where I've worked with a designer. I've worked with two while I've been there, and they've both like so good. So yeah, it's been good. Out of Hanami World came Hanami API this week. I don't know if anyone saw that or looked into it.
Saw the tweet, didn't look into it really, but that is a Rails API-esque thing, I would assume.
Yeah, so it essentially is like the Hanami router with a block syntax, kind of like Sinatra. So it's basically, if I understand right, let me actually pull it up. I think it's actually more performant than Sinatra. So it uses less memory. And yeah, I can do, according to like their benchmarks, it handles more requests per second, uses less memory, and has a much smaller runtime.
I know, what was it, Nate Berkpeck or somebody tweeted earlier about like, you know, some of those benchmarks take with a big grain of salt because they're not necessarily feature equivalent, you know? So like if you're testing against Rails API, like there's all kinds of extra things that Rails gives you out of the box that, you know, those might not or whatever. Like Sinatra doesn't have an ORM of any kind, you know? So like if you're comparing the performance of, you know, Rails or something, it's got extra considerations to take into account or whatever. And it was just like a good thought, you know, that I don't think a lot of people think about when you like see a benchmark, because it's like a very basic comparison between the two when it's not necessarily like a fair one or whatever. But yeah, I would imagine that it's super fast. Most of the Hanami stuff is like quite fast, isn't it?
Yeah, performance is one of the things they pay attention to. Not that like people in Rails don't. It's just something I guess a better phrase is something they strive to continually improve on.
I think they prioritize it or whatever more than Rails kind of prioritizes like ease of use or whatever first. And then performance is whatever is needed to keep it not from being super slow.
I have a question before you go any farther. What is Hanami? I have no idea what Hanami is. I remember on like very early Remote Ruby episodes, you guys talking about it. I have no clue what Hanami is.
So it is an MVC framework for Ruby it takes some different architectural approaches. I'm really into Hanami. So it's an MVC Ruby framework that it's like on their website, they say fast response times, full feature, but lightweight. So like it says it uses 60% less memory than other Ruby frameworks. Some of the architectural differences, some like low-hanging fruit things, controllers, each action is its own class, and each controller action or each class has its own view model that comes with it. So like, and then you have templates. So it does a really good job of like separating things out. Instead of active record, Hanami model, which is built on top of ROM RB. And so like you have repositories and entities, like it kind of separates out persistence and domain logic. That's really like a high level thing.
So I take it you really want to use it because the expression on your face is love, but like distant love that you can't really have, but you really want, even though you know it's forbidden.
I keep forgetting that. Yeah, you can see my face right now. Yeah, I really like it, and they're working on version 2 right now, so it's like 1.3 or something. And version 2.0, they're teaming up with the ROM RB and dry RB like project teams. I've actually never used ROM, but I've used dry RB, and I've built something in Hanami, but I never like released it like to production. I really like the way they approach architecture. It's a little different. I mean, it's pretty different from Rails. Like MVC is really the only two things that are the same. But yeah, I think it's really cool. So when they announced Hanami API, I was just clapping because, yeah, another Hanami thing. Does
That's
that
cool.
answer your question?
It does. Now I'm interested. And if I come back next week and I have that longing look in my face, I'm going to be, you'll know what happened.
Yeah, it's cool. We actually had Luca on the show. I think Chris might have been sick that week, but he's the creator of Hanami, and I sat down and talked to him for quite a while about it.
Yeah,
it's pretty
I
cool.
remember that.
I think it's a really good thing to have other frameworks, in the community, like pushing different directions forward, because that's like, I don't know, it's been like the Rails way or the highway for a long time. And it's really nice to see Hanami doing so well and adding all these kind of like, feature equivalent kind of things to a framework. And yeah, it might require you to go build a few more things from scratch. You can't grab Devise or whatever acts as taggable and those kind of things off the shelf. But like, if you're comfortable doing that, then it might be the perfect framework for a lot of people, which is fantastic, and get a little bit of performance and whatever out of it at the same time.
Yeah, a couple of things I forgot to mention. I was just looking through the guides that I really like is validations actually happen at a controller level versus a model level. And so you just say like validate, do, give it a block. And I think it uses dry validation under the hood. And it's really slick because then like you don't necessarily instantiate the model and try and persist it or like check that it's valid. Like you just say, hey, are these params valid? And if I remember correctly, dry validation is like quite fast. Like I don't remember the exact numbers, but I remember it being, I don't want to use the word substantially, but it was faster than like active model validations. So
that's cool. That's one of the things that just like constantly gets me about Rails, like using a database record as your source for the form is rarely like what you need in a complex thing, but you got to go create like a active model object with validations and stuff to get something equivalent, which is nice and works well enough, but it's not like a core thing. And that would save a lot of trouble if Rails was just like, hey, you can do this. You don't need anything new. Like you can still use your active record stuff just like normal, but use this model object and then have that, keep track of these like variables and things that your form might need to collect. You don't necessarily need to save in your database or whatever. That is a constant like source of frustration you see with a lot of Rails developers getting into building more advanced forms and whatever else. And it's just really good to see that like baked into the framework kind of from day one. You can do it with Rails. You just have to like figure out how to do it, which I think a lot of people just look for some guidance from the Rails guides or whatever. And when there's no content on that, you just get frustrated and complain about it and, look to move somewhere else, which is kind of understandable, but we should probably do a better job of, contributing that stuff to the docs and whatever, because it's totally doable. It's not very hard, but you just need examples.
Mm-hmm. That's actually something Hanami guys are really good at. Not only like examples, but like conceptually, like explaining why they do certain things certain ways.
That's super nice.
Yeah, it's really cool. Like, so Hanami actually has like an interactor class built in, and there's a whole page on like here's the feature we're building. Why wouldn't we use callbacks or something like that? Like all this stuff, and it's really good. The other really cool thing, I keep forgetting all these things to mention. You can actually, you can create multiple like apps in one Hanami application. So, if you built like an admin, instead of like just saying like app controllers admin and like making a namespace there, like you actually have like app admin, I think is the folder structure. I mean, like each app has its own like config. That might be changing in the new version, but all the domain, like the models and domain logic and stuff lives outside in like the lib directory. So all those apps can share that.
Huh. That's kind of neat. I think that's the other frustration you see in Rails with Rails engines a lot, is they're pretty confusing on how they work. That's maybe an understatement too.
Yes.
Having built a few of those, they've been kind of a nightmare to understand how they work, or little things like plugging in a extension or something and doing it in the right place in your like initializers on. So usually you need like a to prepare block or something like that. Like wait until the callback for action controller base is loaded, and then do something when that happens. It's not super intuitive, and the documentation's also fairly sparse about that too, which has bitten me in a bunch of different times in projects. Hanami kind of gets probably a really nice, like, here's how Rails did it, and here's all the like really rough edges. Let's just do those differently, because we can from a fresh slate, which probably benefits the clarity of a lot of that code like immensely. So I'm going to have to try it on a project. Didn't you build something with Hanami, Jason?
Yeah, I don't remember what it was that stopped me. I built it, and then I ended up moving a lot of it just back into a Rails app. It actually probably wasn't Hanami's fault. It was that I got tripped up on Webpack, because like there's no Webpacker. Like somebody is, I think, made a gem that'll do it, but I was naive and tried to do it myself, and it just got out of hand.
I don't think I've ever set up Webpack by itself. Now that you mention it, I've always used Webpacker, and I'm sure that it's just everything I saw was like when Webpack was becoming popular, it was like, here, let's go build our giant config file. And I was like, can you guys not just ship like a default one or something? And yeah, it seemed like it was not going to be very easy to go set up yourself. So yeah, I would assume they're going to tackle that as part of the core at some point if they're going to officially like adopt that as their build pipeline or whatever.
I have set up Webpack, like straight up Webpack before in a non-Rails app, and it was the most frustrating thing I've ever had to do. Probably, it may be in my entire life. Out of all of the frustrating things that have ever happened to me, having to try to wrangle a Webpack config was definitely in the top 10 of that list.
Oh man, we can see your Vietnam flashbacks happening.
Oh my God, it was so angering, and everyone's doing it completely differently. And I don't want to talk about this.
Yeah, man, what was it that I was doing the other day? It felt the same way. I can't remember what it was, but even like Docker setups for Rails apps, they're like every single one of them is like significantly different than the others. And it's like, there's no standardized way of setting this up. And yeah, it's just a nightmare, like those projects that don't have some sort of convention and just leave it all to everyone to do their own custom configuration thing. Like it is no fun to work on those projects. Not at all.
Speaking of no fun, I have a question for y'all. Have you guys ever run into like invalid authenticity token errors with like Devise that you just can't ever resolve?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times what I've seen is like, you might have 2 pages open in your browser or whatever, and I'll see that in production where somebody's like done something that updates their authenticity token, then goes back to an older page that's like on the old one, and that fails. But there's like a million different sources that can cause some of those things. So what is like your rough idea of what might be causing it or what's going on?
So this is not me. Nate is just having one of those days. For some reason, he can't log in or out of the app locally. He can't submit any forms when he tries to disable the logging in stuff. And he has blown all his gens away. He's blown all the cache away. He's restarted his computer. He's tried different browsers. There was a legitimate issue with Puma. There was a CV or a security release of Puma last night that did have a problem with authenticity tokens. But we rolled that back to the old version. I have yet to have a problem at all with it, but he can't use the app at all. He says the tests all run, they run fine. He just can't interact with the app. And I think he's actually starting to lose it.
Oh man. I wonder if, because sometimes it can deal with like cookie domains and that sort of thing. Like I wonder if it's related to something like that in the browser, maybe. I'm not sure. It seems like one that you like got to go into the code in the browser and poke around and see what's going on and like, you know, log out the CSRF token that is in the session and then the one that's submitted in the form and all that and see why they don't match up and whatever. I remember having done that before because I couldn't figure it out too. And I like went into Action Controller or something and put in a before action before anything happened so that it was like, here, I'm going to check your params and I'm going to check your session for the CSRF token that is currently saved. So I can see if they match or not. And then if they match, then something weird going on in my code that verifies it. Or if they're different, like, then at least I know something's changed that somewhere. And maybe I can figure out why it's getting changed and it's not consistent or whatever. That'd probably be the first place I would start now if I was to debug something like that. Because it would maybe narrow down kind of which piece of the puzzle is breaking or whatever.
Yeah. He's not having a good day. He messaged me and he says, I'm effectively neutered as a contributor. And I thought that was just an amazing way to word that.
That is hilarious. Well, I don't know. Hopefully you guys get that figured out soon because that sounds like a really painful thing to deal with. Something that you like take for granted as a core piece of Rails that just works seamlessly without any thoughts. When that breaks, then you're like, oh boy. Now I have to like go figure out how it actually works inside Rails and figure out what have we done or what's wrong on my system. You know, those are like long debugging sessions when something goes wrong on that level. And speaking of that Puma thing, it looks like Nate Berkopec released a fix for that like in the last hour. But Jason, I know you guys were dealing with that same Puma issue in production or whatever.
Yeah, we rolled out and people were having trouble logging in, so we had to roll back pretty quickly and it got brought down to the new line thing. But
yeah, it was like what? Basically, if you had duplicate cookies, then Rack like concatenates them with a new line or something in between, and the new line's like a vulnerability in Puma, I guess, specifically or something.
yeah, to be honest, I missed all of it because I was pairing with someone and then I came back and they had already like handled it all. I was like, all right, see ya.
Yeah, so. Like, sweet, this is great. Yeah, there's been a handful of little things that have broken Puma recently because I guess it's like 6 months ago or something. Around when Puma 4 came out, there was like a socket activation for like graceful restarts and stuff on Linux broke. That was a big like, I pretty much for Hatchbox just had to tell people to roll back their Puma versions until that was fixed. And it wasn't like clear how to, it seemed like it wasn't clear how to replicate the issue and then test for it and whatever in an automated test suite, of course. So it seemed like it took quite a while for people to get that figured out and fixed. But yeah, Puma is still hands down my favorite, like Ruby web server. And Nate does a fantastic job keeping up with all those. There's like, you know, it's like trying to debug random people's Rails code, you know, and fix bugs in the framework. Like that has got to be a very tough thing to maintain and support with all of those random uses of it all over. So huge props to him.
It's probably worth noting that Richard Schneeman and Evan Phoenix are also maintainers of that. So shout out to all of them.
Yeah, they've all done a fantastic job with that. What else is new this week, guys?
I had one of my blog posts published in Ruby Weekly. That was pretty cool. I didn't know or expect that. So it's a little check mark on my unofficial in my head list of things to accomplish.
Yeah, that's a resume line item, right?
Yeah, for sure.
What was your article about?
It was setting up the VS Code for Rails development, which is funny because I think I sent out a tweet one night about thinking about writing that, and you actually responded and you were like, just do it now. And I just did it then, and that has been a very popular post somehow.
Dude, that's great. Yeah, I remember you tweeted it and I was like, do it. And it's funny how those like random things that you're like, maybe I should do this. And then you do it and you find out like, whoa, this is actually way more popular than I ever imagined. That is a good feeling, right? Now you've got your Ruby Weekly feature as your claim to fame here.
Yep. I'm checking off all the boxes for my 24th birthday.
Yeah, there you go. Accomplishing those life goals.
Yeah.
Yeah, I this past week, I hadn't touched Shrine for file uploading for a couple years now, maybe. It's been a while. Shrine version 2 was like the last time I covered it on Go Rails, and a bunch of those plugins and stuff had changed for version 3. So to kind of dive back into Shrine and check it out again, I ended up rebuilding a like year-old Rails app called animatedgif.me that I originally built just to like make it so you could type in the domain and then / and a word, and it would give you a random GIF. Like, so if you go to /money, it'll give you a random GIF tagged money, and then you can copy it to your clipboard and, you know, paste it in Slack or whatever really fast. So I built that, and like the original version of the site was just linking to images on like other sites because I didn't want to pay for storing all those images and everything. And I thought it would be a good time to like rebuild it, but I ended up like recording the entire thing. So I did it in like, I don't know, 4 hours or something, and recorded that whole process as a screencast. And like we start with the new Rails app and go all the way to deploying it to production and everything, which is pretty fun. So I published the first like video on that on Go Rails this week, which is kind of cool. People have been asking to see more of like the whole process of how I develop an app and test things and whatever else. So that was kind of fun. Shrine is still like the most flexible file uploading gem there is, and I would recommend people look at Shrine for how to design a modular like Ruby library. It's so nice to be able to say like, I want this feature, and you just say Shrine plugin and the name of it, and there it goes. That is one of my favorite things. It's so flexible. Have you guys used Shrine at all?
Looked at it, haven't used it.
Yeah, I think I used it for a few tutorials, probably maybe some from you when I was first learning, but I haven't used it since.
Are you guys doing file uploads for anything?
Yes, we are at CodeFun. All active storage, and Nate has monkey patched all the things. So it gives you all the things that people reference when they don't. Like, I can't use active storage because I need CDNs or I need this or that. He's monkey patched all of it into the app. So it works great. We've never had a problem with it.
I've seen all of those threads and issues on GitHub, and then all the like monkey patch examples of how to, you know, put in CDN URLs and stuff. It's pretty unfortunate it didn't come out with that originally, but it looks like a lot of that will be in Rails 6.1, which is good. But it's good to see that that's been like nice and reliable for you guys, because I was going to do the same thing at one point, and I just opted to use Shrine instead because it's a little bit more flexible if I'm going to transcode like videos or whatever that I don't. You could maybe do it with active storage, but you would just say like, we'll have an upload or a file attachment for like the original video, and then like separate file attachments for the MP4 or whatever that you transcode into, versus like Shrine would just keep all those as one upload as just different formats or something. So I guess there are probably ways you could hack around that with active storage, but the CDN thing I thought was almost a crucial piece of what active storage should have supported at the beginning. But I guess Basecamp didn't really need that as much because they're private files for them. But that's good to hear. I'm excited to see that hopefully, if we're lucky, Rails 6.1 comes out this year around RailsConf time in a couple months.
Go ahead and press X for doubt. Maybe 6.03, but I doubt we'll be seeing 6.1 at RailsConf.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed. RailsConf proposals get announced like next week or the week after, something like that.
March 4th.
March 4th. Cool. Well, hopefully those will be all announced soon, and got my ticket and hotel and everything ready. So I'm excited to go out there to Portland. The only time I've ever been to Portland was I flew in, got a rental car, and drove to Bend, Oregon for Ruby on Rails. That was my favorite, maybe one of my favorite conferences ever. It was just like we had a bar with a beer called Ruby made for us, and then the bar opened at 9 a.m., which is fantastic. That was a very fun conference. I'm excited to go back out to Oregon this year.
Do you listen to Founder Quest from the Honey Badger folks?
I do. I haven't listened to it in a while, though, because now that I don't have a commute, I don't listen to a whole lot of podcasts anymore.
So they're not the episode that released today, but last week's episode, they were talking about RailsConf because they're kind of from the Portland area, and they are going to have what seems to be a very big presence at RailsConf this year. They're going to have like they said it's not a booth because they said literally no one wanted to man the booth. So they're going to have like some sort of area where you can all come hang out, and they'll have swag and stuff and just like a hangout place. And they also are having a party on the first night at Ground Control, which is like an arcade bar in Portland, which sounds freaking awesome.
That'll be fun. I can't wait for that. I love those guys.
Yeah, I cannot wait for that either. It's going to be super fun.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. I'll definitely plan on going to that. Jason will have to do our expensive dinner again this year.
We're going to do the same expensive dinner at MicroConf.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Oh, man. When's that? I'm excited for that, too. It'll be my first year of going to MicroConf.
A couple of weeks before RailsConf.
It's like April 20th or something around there.
Sounds about right. I had one thing I want to mention. I released a Ruby gem this week.
Hey! Woo!
It's called Andrew Says, and it's a wraparound mini test that just, instead of saying test, she says Andrew Says, because Andrew Famera is so hell-bent on using mini tests that I wanted to build a shrine to his love for the tool.
It's pretty great.
This works out great for me. This works out exceptionally well.
The README says Andrew Famera, but the actual implementation is just Andrew_says. So you're good.
Oh yeah, I'll be making a PR. So
I tested it in field help, so I know it works.
We use mini tests at CodeFun, and yeah, so I know what I'll be doing for the rest of the day.
Yep, it's up there in the gym world. So.
And so, do you have any other like memes, DSL stuff that you want to add to it?
I kind of handcuffed myself by calling it Andrew Says, but
I figure you can make some other methods that just like are aliases for a cert and the cert not. It says like absolutely or like absolutely not.
Yeah, it took me an embarrassing amount of time to figure out how to do that because like Rails, if I'm not mistaken, is the one that implements the like test keyword. Because like mini test by default is like define test underscore blah, blah, blah. Like they're actual just methods. But yeah, it works inside of Rails and outside of Rails.
That's cool. That's a good, it's just a fun project to work on. But like those little projects, just out of curiosity, end up teaching you a bunch of little things about like, here's how Rails tests work and how mini test works. And you probably walked away with that, learning a few things that you didn't expect to, and you got a good, laugh out of it at the same time.
Yeah, I wish I would just do more stupid stuff like that.
I love doing stupid stuff like that. I'm actually going to take all of my stupid stuff I've done and start using this to make sure everyone truly hates me that ever comes across contributing to one of my projects. They'll be like, seriously, this is what you're doing in the tests? This is amazing. This is my favorite thing.
You can make your instead of failures for your test, it's just seriously, you think this equals that?
Yeah. When it fails, just put get wrecked, bro. Something like that. Make sure to throw a bunch of words that mean nothing in there, like yeet.
Yeah. Oh man, one of my favorite gems in the entire world is Rails. So if you type gem install RIALS and you just typo Rails, you should just go do that right now and try it out and see what happens. I don't even know if I want to spoil the surprise. Have you guys seen this? I think Jason, I've shown you this before. Maybe.
I'm trying it now.
Okay. Also,
well.
no apologies if this breaks your Rails gem.
Well, I'm moving out of this environment then.
It will override the Rails executable or whatever. So you just
I'm not doing that. I just hit no.
Reinstall Rail ties.
I'm not.
Dang it,
afraid.
Guys! I shouldn't have said that.
It does give you a warning. No, I can't do that.
It's phenomenal.
I don't want to end up like Nate.
It's phenomenal. What it will do is override the Rails executable, and when you type Rails anything, it will just start playing an ASCII rickroll in your terminal, and it's colored and plays music and everything. It's fantastic. And then this happened to me. Oh man, pretty early on in my Rails career, and I didn't know how to reinstall rail ties, or I didn't know where the executable came from. So I installed it and couldn't figure out how to uninstall it and whatever. So I just blew away everything and reinstalled it. But I'm pretty sure you just reinstall the rail ties gem and you're good to go. But
I have to create or rbenv install a new old Ruby version.
Yeah, there you go.
Throw that away when I'm done.
It's pretty fantastic. I highly recommend it. Well, anything this week?
Nothing from me.
Well, I gotta say, welcome to the Code Fund Podcast Network.
Yeah,
We didn't even talk about that. I started the episode by saying new home and then never expounded upon that.
It was just a teaser for you to listen to the entire episode until we talked about it.
True.
Yeah. So Remote Ruby has moved onto the Code Fund Podcast Network, and I don't want to speak for Chris, but we're very excited. It's really cool. I'm glad people listen and want us to join them.
Yeah, I think it'll be great to have some support and keep the workload of editing podcasts and stuff is not a simple one. So this will be a nice way for us to keep the podcast going as long as possible and keep the support going for it. Yeah, it's going to be a very good, support network for us to be involved in. So I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm glad I brought it up to Eric one day just randomly. He was very excited at the prospect. He's like, oh, the way he described you guys was the most flattering descriptions I've ever heard. He was very, very excited about and this was before I actually knew you guys. I think before you guys had met with him, but he just talking about the prospect of it, he was very excited.
That's awesome. Yeah, I don't think I had met him yet until we talked earlier this week. So we're super excited to be joining, and it'll be a good time. You guys are good people over there at Code Fund.
I'm blushing. You don't know what I do in my off time though. Yeah, it's exciting. The podcast network is growing, and I'm excited to see what kind of happens with it. I don't think I'd ever be able to say when I first started programming or when I even first started podcasting that I would work for a company that's actually actively growing a large network of tech podcasts. So it's pretty cool, pretty interesting, especially since it's something I'm interested in.
Yeah, and I think there's just a lot of little things you can learn from podcasts that I wish that I had them when I was around learning way back when. when I was in high school and stuff, I would have probably spent all my time listening to podcasts of programmers and entrepreneurs and whatever else. It's a great way to learn how other people think about solving problems and whatever else, understanding what professional developers even do all day and their frustrations and whatever else that you can relate to is just a really nice thing. So podcasts are awesome. A lot of fun.
Yeah. Plus one of that, because I learned a ton from listening to podcasts when I was first starting out. This one included, and the one thing I really liked about Remote Ruby is that compared to all the others I was listening to at the time, Remote Ruby was like a discussion. I like that it was just like a discussion. It didn't sound like almost scripted like some of the other ones do. It's just a very like real conversation, almost like even if you guys didn't record it, I could still see us all talking about this stuff.
That was our original idea for doing this. We were like, we just sit and talk for an hour or whatever every week. So why don't we just record the stuff and publish it? And it's like the same philosophy I have with the Go Rails screencasts. Like, I don't want them to be scripted or anything like that. I want them to feel like we're just sitting down and pair programming together. I don't like watching lecture-y stuff or too scripted of things. I don't get to learn how someone actually works. I get to learn the perfect version of the world because it's already scripted. So I have an aversion to that. So I kind of like, creating stuff that way. So we will have a few changes like sponsorships now in the podcast, but the rest of it's going to stay exactly the same, which is fantastic.
Well, good to catch up, and y'all have a good week.
You too. See ya.
Bye.
This podcast is brought to you by our friends at Linode. With 11 data centers worldwide, including their newest data center in Sydney, Australia, enterprise-grade hardware, S3-compatible storage option, and their next-generation network, Linode delivers the performance you expect at a price that you don't. Get started on Linode today by going to linode.com/remote Ruby.